Hello, everyone. On behalf of the Collective Impact Forum, I'd like to welcome you to the Fall 2016 Collective Impact webinar series and today's webinar on the what, the why, and the how of building capacity for collective impact. My name is Sherry Brady, and I'm a Senior Associate for Strategic Partnerships at the Aspen Institute Forum for Community Solutions. We're a partner with FSG and the Collective Impact Forum, and I'm glad to be your host. Today's webinar is the second webinar in a three-part series adapted from sessions from the 2016 Collective Impact convening that was held in Seattle, Washington this past June, and voted on by attendees as to what they wish to hear repeated. We have a terrific program for you today with great speakers, but before we get started, I wanted to just touch on a couple of items. Over the course of this webinar series, we'll be talking a lot about collective impact and highlighting initiative stories, presenting tools and methods for you to use. We encourage you to sign up for the Collective Impact Forum, which the link is on the slide there in front of you. It's a free resource for people who and organizations to access tools, training opportunities, and peer networks for those who are working on collective impact. If you haven't already, we encourage you to tab over to the Collective Impact Forum right now, click on the resources, and download today's presentation slides. You can also check your email with the slide link, or you can click on the box that says, click here to download slides on the bottom right of the webinar screen that should be in front of you now. This will take you to a zip file of the presentation slides. Today's program is about 90 minutes long, and we encourage you to stay engaged with our presenters by answering polls and asking questions. Periodically, our presenters will ask you a poll like this one. How many people are watching today's webinar with you at your location? We encourage attendees to organize viewing parties for today's webinar so we could welcome multiple attendees from the same location. We'll pause now while you select the number of attendees so we can get an idea of how many people are joining us today. Great. Thank you for participating. Hopefully that's pretty easy. We'll have a bunch of those as we're continuing through the presentation. Other than the polls, we also want to hear from you, your questions and comments. You can submit them at any time during the presentation via the white box on the right side of your screen. The presenters will verbally respond to as many questions as time allows during the question and answer period. And we'll have several question and answer periods throughout the presentation. We also encourage you to join the conversation on Twitter using the hashtag Collective Impact. You'll also see our handles for CI Forum tweets and FSG tweets on the screen. If you need any technical assistance during the webinar, you can email customer support at Blue Sky eLearn at the email address there, support@blueskyelearn.com. Lastly, this event is being recorded, and you will receive the recording link to your email after the conclusion of the webinar. Thank you all for joining, and I hope you enjoy the presentations. I'd like now to introduce Ron Dendis, who is the Program Officer with the Writer Pool Foundation, who will moderate today's webinar. Ron?
Thank you, Sherry. So happy to be here. We've been doing this work for about 3 years now, and this work started off really slowly and methodically, but it has been rapidly progressing to the point of a lot that we presented in Seattle is very different now. So if you are a return visitor from our Seattle session, there will be a lot of new information that we'll be sharing with folks today. I want to start off by just checking on a few assumptions. I think a lot of the issues that we choose to address are really complex issues. And I think for us, we've kind of come to the conclusion that if we really want to make progress, we have to get people in systems that typically are siloed to work together. This is really hard work, and we've struggled in the past to do this well. We look at collective impact as a framework that can be used here, but not the framework. It's the one that we're choosing to talk about today, but we by no means want to tell folks that it's the only cross-sector tool that can be used for this. One of the things that I really like about collective impact is that it's constantly talking about creating the environment that we want to do this work in, and I think that's really important. We just can't take this framework and plop it over a complex issue and expect things to be differently. We have to invest in capacity and infrastructure in order for this framework or any other framework to take hold. And although this presentation was originally designed with funders as the audience, we think the materials are relevant for a broader audience. But we do firmly believe that we all have to play a role in capacity building if we want this work to be successful. So our learning objectives today, the first is we would like for the audience to understand our journey and why we chose to take it. We'd also like for you to have a deeper insight into 6 areas of capacity building, those being leadership development, trust, collective impact development and readiness, community engagement, backbone development, and data sharing. These are not the 6 areas of capacity. These are just 6 areas of capacity building that we chose to focus on. We're by no means saying these are the only ones. These are the ones that we have been toying with over the last few years and have the most to talk about. We also wanted to share the strategies that we've developed here in Allentown on how we're addressing capacity building. And as importantly, we want to share findings from a series of conversations that we've had with funders from around the United States and Canada. When we originally did this session in Seattle, we blocked off half of the time of the presentation to do some community-based participatory research. We asked everybody to tell us their stories about how they're building capacity. And boy, we got a really, really interesting bunch of answers back from folks. There are a lot of people out there that are struggling with trying to implement collective impact well. And the message that we heard from folks was they love the concept, they got the concept, they put large amounts of money, 6-, 7-figure grants into a collective impact initiative, got way, way, way out on point, and then realized they didn't have the capacity to do this work, and now they're at the point of no return, and they're stuck. And it's created a lot of frustration with a lot of folks around the United States and Canada. It is important that I share some disclaimers with you. We have been doing this work for a while, but we have yet to fund or be involved with a true collective impact initiative. That's been by intention on our part. We have chosen not to fund collective impact until we can get a handle on the capacity building aspect of this. We aren't presenting the definitive approach to capacity building for collective impact. We're not selling anything. We're just sharing our experiences with you. People have told us that we have a story that's worth sharing, and we want to share that with you today. We encourage pushback. We encourage challenges. Please ask questions and tell us what you think about what we're presenting. There will be 4 places in the presentation where we're going to stop and take questions, and so please push back on some of this stuff. It makes our work stronger. We're just trying to create a space here where we can all grow and learn and figure out how to do this better. I think this is a great a concept that a lot of folks are putting a lot of energy into. Is there a way we can do this better? So I mentioned that there will be times for you to ask us questions. Right now, it's time for us to ask you questions. And the first one is, what role or roles do you play in collective impact? Okay, and it looks like a nice mix of almost half the folks are backbones, about a quarter are funders, and quite a few technical assistance providers and consultants. Great, so this is going to be a great conversation. Next question, how many years have you been involved in a collective impact initiative? And it looks like the majority of the folks have been involved in this for 1 to 5 years. So we've got a nice range of experience. Looks like there have been folks that have been doing this for quite a while. So again, really good fodder for future conversation. As with many good stories, the best place to start isn't always the beginning. 3 weeks ago, we were lucky to have Paul Schmitz come to Allentown to see firsthand the story that I'm about to share with you. For folks who don't know Paul Schmitz, he is one of the FSG fellows and does a lot of work with the Collective Impact Forum. just a very, very knowledgeable guy. And as I'm driving him to the airport and I'm asking him for his final thoughts, he lays a line on me that just provided incredible clarity for me. And he said, a lot of people using collective impact framework jump quickly to impact and forget about collective. And that just so resonated with the work that we were trying to do. We've become so focused on the complex issue that we forget about the work that it takes to build the collaboratives. And we'd like to share some of our experiences around building the collaborative. I work for the Reuter Pool Foundation. The Reuter Pool Foundation is a really small local foundation in Allentown, Pennsylvania. And Allentown is, if you went 60 miles due west from New York City and 70 miles due north from Philadelphia, you would be in Allentown. We're, like I said, a very small foundation, total assets of about $10 million, which means on a really good year, we can give away less than $500,000. We typically fund community development, human services, education, culture and arts, and we're in the third largest metropolitan area in Pennsylvania. So we generate a lot of interest. We get a lot of proposals each year, average about 150 proposals a year. We typically end up funding about 120 of those 150 proposals. And so our philosophy over the last 20 years has been trying to take about $400,000 and spread it as broadly as we possibly can over a large geographic area. So an average size grant is a couple of $1,000s. We've been doing business like this for decades. And the approach has always been, it's about relationship. It's about getting to know folks. Everybody that submits a proposal to us gets a visit. We try and find out exactly what is motivating this organization, where they're getting stuck. We pride ourselves on being able to connect dots. But our grant-making lever has been relatively small. We've made small grants to a lot of different organizations. And about 3 years ago, our trustees said, well, you know what, let's change things up. We want to do things a little differently now. Instead of making 120 small grants, can we increase our lever by making 3 to 6 very large grants? And can we do that in a proactive way? Can we identify the things that we're interested in funding instead of sitting back and waiting for proposals to come to our door? And we'd really like to do place-based work. So can you find us a place where we can do this work? And oh, by the way, we heard about this thing called collective impact. It sounds really exciting. We want to do collective impact. And so they set us off on a journey, and they said, bring us back some big projects that we can be proactive in and really do something with our $400,000 a year. And it didn't take too long for us to find place. Downtown Allentown for years was, I can't even call it a rotting core, an urban core, because it really was a rotted urban core. It had been neglected for 20, 30 years. When manufacturing left the Lehigh Valley, so did our downtown urban areas. And downtown Allentown got hit hardest of any of the urban areas in our region, in the Lehigh Valley. Because of some really innovative tax breaks, there became this great opportunity to invest in downtown Allentown. And over the last 3 years, there have been $2 billion of economic development in Allentown. And that has led to all sorts of incredible things like new office buildings, an arena. We have an AHL hockey team here now, great concerts, luxury hotels. Downtown is booming. It is amazing to see the renovations and the renaissance of the downtown area. It has attracted, we now have 3 Fortune 500 companies in our area, and the largest employer has set up shop in downtown Allentown. And that got us to start gathering the private sector. If you want to do place work, you've got to have the private sector on board. And these folks were really interested in the roles that they can play in community development. What we did was rented some vans, and we put them all in the vans, and we drove them to Baltimore and introduced them to the folks at Johns Hopkins to see how an anchor institution operates in an urban area. And a couple of weeks later, we put them on the van, and we drove them to Philadelphia and had them meet with the folks from the University of Pennsylvania. So we start developing this kind of anchor presence from our private sector. And this was really important because if you go 2 blocks away from all of this great urban development, you've got blocks of incredible blight. And so it really becomes a tale of two cities. You go 2 blocks off of the downtown area, and you're in the area with the highest concentration of poverty, limited access to quality early education. Every single big city problem that you could imagine we're faced here in Allentown. And of course, because of the social woes of this area, every single nonprofit human service organizations or social service organization has a presence in these neighborhoods. So we found that we had place, we had players, we had interest in the for-profit private sector and the nonprofit sector, but did we really have partnership? And what we realized really quickly was partnership in the Lehigh Valley looks something like this. There's a hole in your side of the boat. We hear from folks in education saying, boy, those folks in health, if they could only make sure that these kids were healthy, they'd be better in school. And you'd hear folks from the workforce development folks saying, if the school district could do a better job. There was a lot of finger pointing, there was a lot of blame, there was a lot of, if those guys could only do their job, we wouldn't have this problem. When you showed them the best practices that said, well, healthcare can influence about 20% of health, and education can influence about 20% of learning, and that there are all of these other cross-sector partnerships that need to be in place, what we realized was we just weren't ready to do anything that resembled collective impact. So fortunately, we have a very, very patient board who allowed us to do a little bit of legwork, and we went out and did some data gathering. And we looked at some quantitative data, but most of the data we gathered were qualitative. We did a formal social reconnaissance. We did key stakeholder interviews. We talked to a whole bunch of folks. This was about 13 months worth of work. And what we found was really, really interesting. When we compiled all the information, what we found was some key themes. And folks kind of said, look, there's not a lot of collaboration going on. When we really asked, how do you work with folks? What they described was a little bit of coordination, a little bit of cooperation, but if you really, really want to put a definition of collaboration on this, there really wasn't a lot of collaboration going on. But if you talk to the general population, everybody's collaborating. Oh, we're collaborating with everybody around you. We'd love to collaborate. When you really got down to brass tacks, there wasn't a lot of collaboration going on. The quote that I heard quite often was, man, they never taught us this stuff in school. How do you do collective impact? We really don't get the premise here. Conceptually, we get it, but how do you actually do this stuff? It's really hard work. The idea of servant leadership was just foreign to these folks. Leadership meant, I'm in charge, I'm going to point the direction, everybody follows me. And nobody wanted to be the leader, but everybody was waiting for the leader to come. To tell them where to go. The idea that backbone equal power was a theme that we heard a lot. People saying, I want to be a backbone because then I get the money and I get to tell people what to do. This one was a hard pill for me and a lot of my peers to swallow, but what we identified as the biggest problem in collective impact and collaboration were funders. We create this scenario where it's really hard for people to collaborate because we make it about the money. We put a pot of money in front of folks and say, okay, whoever can collaborate the best gets this money, and we make people compete over it. We heard from a lot of the providers, look, we listen to what the funders say, we write down the lingo, we put the lingo in the proposal, and we parrot back to the funder what they want to hear. We get the money, and then we hunker down for 2 years because we know in 2 years, you guys are going to have some other bright idea that you want us to follow. And if we tried to change direction every time you guys had a new idea, we'd never get anything done. So one of the feedback that we heard was, okay, funders, how do you behave in a collaborative environment? And what are you going to do differently in that environment? And the final key theme that we took away from this was that collective impact is not for every community. It's not for every complex social issue. You just can't take this and say, we're going to apply this to every problem we have. We don't have the capacity to do it. We don't have the resources to do it. We've got to be really strategic with where we're saying we're going to be doing collective impact. So after doing all this work and after hearing all this information, we realized, we just opened up Pandora's box. We've got a board that's waiting for us to come back and say, here's where we can invest our money. And all we came back with was, oh my God, we are nowhere near ready to invest. So we had to do some fast thinking, and what we came up with was a really interesting concept that we had no idea how successful it would be and how much of a catalyst it would be for learning. And what we created was the Collective Impact Fellowship. And at this point, I'm going to pass it over to Christine, who's going to talk a little bit about the Collective Impact Fellowship. Before I do that, let me just say this was originally going to be a 3-person panel. And so we had one of our fellows that was going to co-present with us, and unfortunately he couldn't join us today. So we're taking the 6 areas and we're going to be dividing it between Christine and I. We're going to stop after every 2 capacity building areas, and we're going to open it up for questions. So please, please, please challenge us, push us, ask questions. Let's start a dialogue around some of this information. This is really, I think, important stuff. And at this point, I'll turn it over to Christine.
Hi, everyone. Allow me just to take a moment to introduce myself. My name is Christine Carpino, and I'm the program manager for the Collective Impact Fellowship. The Collective Impact Fellowship's objective was to create the conditions, training, and support for cross-sector leaders to better meet community needs in Allentown, which, as Ron mentioned, was a rapidly developing urban area. The program itself consists of several key components. Several key components. The fellows commit to 180 hours of dedicated time over 9 months to learn and work together. And the monthly sessions, when they meet, last about 3 days to 1 day. The Rider Pool Foundation provides small stipends to each organization to compensate for the fellows' time being out of the office each month. We've heard from multiple fellows that this stipend was vital in a couple of ways. One, it indicated the importance of the fellowship to the boards and executives when the fellows asked to participate in this unique program. It also reflected that the funder valued and respected the time of participating individuals. This wasn't just going to be one more hoop that a funder was asking a grantee to jump through, but rather it was a professional development experience that was important enough to the foundation to fund in many ways. Our monthly sessions are led by nationally known faculty instructors, including senior level directors at national nonprofits, executive coaches, and higher education faculty. And finally, the fellowship gives the fellows the time and opportunity for a hands-on application of the tools and training that they receive over the course of the 9 months. We're excited and very proud that our fellowship cohorts are increasingly cross-sector, each cohort that we've had. Our inaugural cohort in 2014 and 2015 consisted of 7 fellows representing the arts, housing, social services, human services, health, and public safety. Our 2015-2016 cohort consisted of 9 fellows representing housing, health, mental health, education, conservation, social services, and our regional chamber of commerce. And our current cohort is our largest yet, with 10 fellows representing healthcare, mental health, education, human trafficking, domestic violence support, immigration, regional planning, and city planning. We are excited to have representatives from our regional and city governments. One significant piece of feedback that we received from the fellows in previous classes was the need to include government staff, and we're glad that they're part of our current cohort. And we're already looking ahead and exploring opportunities for including representatives from the private sector in next year's class. We know that this work can only happen well when we've engaged a true cross-section of community leaders. Our goal is to have 50 fellows go through the fellowship by 2019, so 50 fellows over the course of 5 years. We want to achieve a critical mass of community leaders working in the same place who are trained in CI and community engagement strategies and who have developed a strong network with one another. We see this as the building blocks to stronger collaboration. The fellowship content consists of what we've liked to call Collective Impact 101 Honors Edition, Systemic Leadership and Communication, Community Engagement Strategies, and Opportunities for Application. We've taken to calling it Collective Impact 101 Honors because the fellows are introduced to the nature of collective impact in an intense 3-day training session as their first time all together. They spend 3 days in a room examining the details of the 5 elements that define collective impact initiatives. We also recognize that developing the capacity around collective impact requires supporting a new type of leadership. The type of leadership that contributes to successful solo projects and individual organizational accolades doesn't necessarily align well with the needs of a successful CI initiative. So to that end, one session is focused on leadership, which is accompanied by personalized executive coaching sessions. During this session, the fellows learn about intrinsic motivators and how to create an achievement-centered climate. The goal of the session is not only to identify what motivates each of the fellows, but how the fellows can best tap into what motivates others. Getting to the win-win-win strategies that lead to change only works if all participants feel included and heard, which we know requires unique leadership skills. And this year, we're excited to expand our content offerings by including a session on results-based leadership. We also link our session on systemic leadership with a specific session on communication and messaging, during which the fellows learn how different personality types communicate best. This session focuses on how the fellows can identify their own communication styles, as well as identify the communication styles in others, in order to more effectively manage, lead, and engage, particularly across sectors where language and jargon might be very different. Additionally, we include a session on evaluation and assessment. We listened to the feedback from fellows in previous classes, and while we did always include this session, it happened to be in the latter half of the 9 months. And we listened to the feedback and moved that session closer to the beginning of the fellowship to reinforce that assessment and continuous learning should be at the foundation of any initiative rather than an afterthought. After we set the foundation for the fellowship with these sessions, the focus of the fellowship then shifts to exploring a variety of community engagement strategies as a means of working better with our community rather than on our community. We've introduced or reinforced for those fellows who are already familiar with the strategies of appreciative inquiry, community-based participatory approach with a focus on photo voice, and digital storytelling. We consider these strategies tools in a broader toolkit of skills that the fellows can bring back to their organizations and incorporate into their own work and the work of the coalitions on which they're already participating. Finally, we carve out time for the fellows to have opportunities to apply the tools and training that they've developed over the course of the fellowship in a safe space where they can make mistakes and try again and can get their hands dirty a little bit. In previous years, we've experimented with what we called an action learning project, which encouraged all of the fellows to work together on a single initiative. The Rider Pool Foundation had even put money on the table should the fellows get excited about their idea and want to move forward. But we heard feedback from the fellows that such a model was not necessarily productive and created additional stress. We listened and we retooled the application portion. This year, we're asking each of the fellows to come with what we're calling an individualized action learning project. So a coalition or an initiative in which they're already working and take time to apply their skills and training to these already existing activities. We recognize that one of the gaps in our community is not necessarily a lack of collaborative excitement around collaboration or collaborative goals, but rather the capacity to move forward. So rather than create something new, we're listening to the fellows and we're trying to strengthen the capacity of what already exists. Overall, we want the fellowship to be a place where we can take seriously the idea that collective impact seeks to build the environment in which we want to do this work. And so the fellowship encourages that fellows, the majority of whom continue to be nonprofit leaders, to engage differently with funders. Rather than be reactive to funder requirements, the fellowship is a space to have an iterative dialogue with the funder about how to most effectively move the needle on complex social issues, to discuss what support would look like and how to define success together. The goal of the fellowship is not only to provide training and new knowledge, but to model a new way of working collaboratively between organizations and funders. One of the key goals that we're working on is to build trust among sectors. And the Collective Impact Fellowship is key in this goal. One of the strongest outcomes of the fellowship has frankly been the fellowship. The majority of the 26 fellows did not know each other or hadn't worked with each other prior to the first session. And so the fellowship provided the time and space to build connections and develop cross-sector relationships. In a series of interviews conducted after the 2015-2016 fellowship experience, every participant noted that they now have someone to call in another organization or sector that they didn't have before. That connection made them feel more comfortable and confident about reaching out to others. And these connections have led to much stronger partnerships. We found fellows reaching out to fellows to participate on boards, to connect, to engage in shared training, and just the creation of closer social ties, all of which we think serve as the basis for deeper collaboration. After the fellowship experience, we've had the fellows acknowledge that the 9 months didn't necessarily make them CI experts and that they still had more to learn and wanted to learn more. And so after a candid and iterative dialogue between the Ryder Pool Foundation and the fellows, particularly those from our 2015-2016 cohort, they created what they're calling the Community of Practice, which is a fellow-driven initiative motivated by what they termed the 4 C's: contributing to collective impact efforts, continuous learning, creating a new culture for doing work, and connecting with other fellowship classes. These Community of Practice meetings occur once a month for about 2 hours midweek, and they address issues that the fellows have identified as important to their work. For instance, we've spent time reviewing the results from a social needs pilot survey that was administered at our local children's clinic. We're focusing on issues of equity and implicit bias, as well as accessing and understanding data. These meetings are initiated by the fellows with a little behind-the-scenes coordination support from the Ryder Pool Foundation. And although it's still early, we feel that there's significant momentum around these events. We like to say that we have Community of Practice critical mass. An average of 15 to 20 of the fellows are attending and participating, and we've seen a marked difference in the sense of community among the fellows. These are people who like being together. They like learning together and working together, and we think that's a great foundation for coming up with new and innovative ways of solving complex social issues. We have a lot of momentum around collective impact and collaboration in our community. And one of the ways in which we're seeing that manifested is through what's been termed the Stone Soup Makers. The Ryder Pool Foundation and the United Way of the Greater Lehigh Valley have been serving as capacity building conveners for a unique initiative intended to develop a collaborative ecosystem in the Lehigh Valley with the goal of making collaboration easier. And it's called Stone Soup Makers because it's based on the children's story of Stone Soup, where everyone has something to offer. And so this cross-sector group came together to identify the assets that we have in our community, to acknowledge the gaps that exist, and to develop a plan for building the collaborative muscle in our community. The fellowship and the fellows are key components of this ecosystem, but they aren't and can't be the only components. Rather, investing in strengthened capacity throughout our community will catalyze collaborative activities. And Ron will speak in more detail about the Stone Suit Makers initiative. The Stone Suit Makers is also a unique model for the collaboration between two of our funders, Rider Pool Foundation and the United Way of the Greater Lehigh Valley. Both organizations are committed to strengthening the collaborative ecosystem. The United Way has been working on this broadly across the region, while the Rider Pool Foundation has been focused on depth, collective impact in and around downtown Allentown. Working together in this way has allowed each organization to support each other while also pursuing their own objectives and reducing repeated efforts. I'm going to pause here for just for a moment and open up to questions. We've gotten a great deal of questions.
I have a whole bunch of questions. Thank you so much. I guess I don't think we're going to have time to tackle all of them, but we'll get through as many as we can. The first one is, how do you evaluate your capacity building efforts if you are not funding any collective impact initiatives? That's a really good question. Do you want to take first crack at it, Christine, and then I'll jump in with some comments?
That is an excellent question. One of the goals for this year of the fellowship was to try to get a sense of the capacity building in the community. So over the course of this fellowship class, my role actually will be to work on evaluating capacity building efforts. One of the ways we're going to do that is try to use ripple effect mapping to identify the connections that have been made with the fellows and the new initiatives and activities that have come out of those relationships. We're also hoping that as we shift to the individualized action learning projects where each fellow is coming to the table with something that they're already working on, that by being able to apply the tools and training that they're getting from the fellowship to those projects and initiatives, that those initiatives will become stronger, or that we'll be able to better identify changes in behavior and ways of working. Just anecdotally, we have, because of the momentum in our area, several of our fellows in our current cohort are already participating on emerging collective impact initiatives. And just in our first 3-day session, which happened in October, we had several fellows say, I have to rethink the way I'm doing this. I have to come to my meetings differently. I have to engage community more. There's already a marked sense that they can improve the work that they're already doing. So our goal will be to systematically track those changes of behavior as a way of evaluating our capacity building.
The last slide that I'll present at the end here will be the early successes. And so I have to go back to my board and explain what is coming out of the money that they're investing in this. So we've tried to include a semi-rigorous qualitative process here to start gathering information on the impact that this work is making. We have time for one more question, and this question also is coming from someone who sounds like they want to apply to the fellowship. And one thing that I don't think we explained clearly enough is one of the unique things about the Collective Impact Fellowship here is that it's a place-based fellowship. I did a fellowship several years ago where I got on a plane and 4 times a year flew to great parts of the United States and got to hang with really cool people and talk about some really innovative ways of improving health. And then I'd get back on the plane and I'd come back here and I'd be the only person who went on this journey. So I'd have no one to resonate with. I had no one who understood the direction that I was trying to go in. The unique thing about the Collective Impact Fellowship is all of the fellows have been selected from agencies that serve those 84 square blocks around the downtown Allentown area. So this is place-based. These are folks that are rubbing elbows with each other and don't know each other and don't understand what each other does. We're gonna put a stop on the questions now. Boy, they are really pouring in. Thank you. And we'll leave some time at the end to try and get to as many of these questions as possible. I am going to transition now over to, thank you, to talk a little bit about we go. Got it straight. Okay, to talk a little bit about collective impact development and readiness. Chronologically, this should be later in the presentation, but it dovetails nicely with Christine's discussion of stone soup makers. So I moved it up to this part. We're giving a lot of thought. When Paul Schmitz was here and he said, boy, there are a handful of places in the United States that are putting the proper emphasis on collective, and this is one of those places. He then followed that up by said, but you know, at some point you got to move to impact. And so we started thinking about, well, yeah, how do we make that transition? At some point, all of this capacity building has to be pushed in a particular direction. So how do we start moving things in that direction? And Stone Soup Makers provided us just a great background because it really was creating the ecosystem for more collaboration. It really gave us the opportunity to have funders and community members and academics and nonprofit leaders at the table saying, okay, what do we want this ecosystem to look like? How do we make it so that it's organic instead of forced? That it's not a funder saying, we need to do something about childhood obesity, bring us your best proposals, but it really was emerging from the community organically. And it put the funders in a position of being a partner instead of the leader. And I think that becomes critical in the trust building and in the shared power. And what the Stone Soup Makers ended up coming up with, this is going to be a really busy slide, just to warn you. They came up with this really intricate way of developing this big, broad ecosystem. And there are some terrific ideas in here. But this is a big, bold movement that will take years to do and a lot of resources. And quite frankly, we just don't have that time. So we talked to the Stone Soup Makers Steering Committee and the United Way and said, all right, how do we take the principles of this work? Servant leadership, cross-sector involvement. We're including the people that are closest to the pain. This is about trusting each other and understanding what we're trying to do. Funders as partners, not drivers. How do we take those principles and come up with a quicker way of going from collective to impact? And what we came up with was a rapid prototyping process. And what we were looking to do was just a faster approach to this work, but maintain the spirit and intent of what the Stone Soup Makers had come up with. And our thought is, if we took small amounts of money, maybe $15,000 to $25,000, and we identified 4 to 6 emerging collective impact initiatives, and we said, give us a budget. All we want from you is a budget, and here's the money. And with this money, we want you to try and hit 13 milestones. And those milestones are not big, audacious outcomes or deliverables like reducing childhood obesity or reducing diabetes or improving reading levels. What we'd like for you to do is just hit 13 milestones, things like convene leaders, hold dialogues, create community engagement plans, form cross-sector steering committees. Basically, what we did was we lifted all of the conditions off of the FSG's phases of collective impact and made those the milestones. And so if we said, here's $15,000 to $20,000 for some walking around money, figure out how to get these 13 milestones completed, and we provided you with a collective impact fellow as a coach or a navigator, and we gave you a data platform hub with access to thousands of data sources, a mapping tool, and the ability to upload your own data, and I'll talk more about this later on in the presentation. But boy, could we start rapidly producing potential collective impact initiatives? I'm a gardener. I spend all my free time out in the garden. And I'm going to make a little correlation here. When a plant is just starting to emerge and you put too much fertilizer on it, you kill it. So trying to find the right amount of fertilizer to get that plant to grow, to get the root systems to take, and to develop the stems to bear fruit is really an important part of gardening. And in grant making, sometimes we kill really good ideas by providing them with too much money. And so how do we just give them enough money to pay for their time and the effort that goes into this work and have realistic expectations of what can be accomplished the funding. And we're figuring that with this, three things can happen. Ideas will emerge that will need no new resources. They'll be ready to go, and they're off to the races. There'll be others that need ongoing resources, but after 6 to 12 months of this work, they'll have real data, they'll have real strategy, and they'll have real partners. So this creates that second wave of funders that become the early adopters of innovation. So rather than going to a funder with, I've got this idea, give us money, and we can give us a lot of money, and we can play this out over a long period of time, is there a way of just injecting a small amount of money and creating situations for other funders to step up and say, now that this work is done, we understand what you're trying to do. Yes, how do we be a partner in this? And the third thing that can come out of this is that we identify projects that just aren't ready to go, and we just allow them to fail faster and fail cheaper. And that was one of the big lessons from our conversations in Seattle. People got at the point of no return and they couldn't get out of it. So how do we create an environment, an ecosystem where things can fail faster and fail cheaper, and we can learn from those failures in trying to move forward? So we're rolling out the rapid prototyping this month. This is a brand new concept, and I'm hoping that we'll have some good stories to share at the Collective Impact Forum convening in Boston this year. So more to follow on this. This is the part of the presentation where we turn it over to our third co-presenter, who unfortunately can't be here. Jamil Sanchez was the executive director of Promise Neighborhoods of the Lehigh Valley, and congratulations to Jamil. He just took a great job with United Way in a neighboring community. So we're hoping we can expand this idea of capacity building into a larger region moving forward. When Jamil was here at Promise Neighborhoods of the Lehigh Valley, he just did incredible work around community engagement, and I wish that we could do this presentation in his voice, because it's just so much more powerful when it's coming from the community than rather it coming from one of the funders. The Promise Neighborhoods, if you trace back the heritage here, it goes back to the Jeffrey Canada's work in the Harlem Children's Zone. And our local United Way became very enamored with Jeffrey Canada, had him come down here several times, had a regular shuttle running up to Harlem to look at the Harlem Children's Zone. They wanted to replicate the Harlem Children's Zone here with a cradle to careers approach to childhood development. And United Way was really the front runner of replicating the Harlem Children's Zone. About 2 years into the development of what we were calling the Youth Success Zone, President Obama gets elected. He recruits the number 3 guy at the Harlem Children's Zone to come to his administration, and they start Promise Neighborhood movement. And what we did was we paralleled the federal Promise Neighborhood movement. We're using the Promise Neighborhood framework, but we received no federal money. So it is 100% supported by local funding. Promise Neighborhood provides no direct service. Their work is engaging the community and connecting them with partners that can help them work on the problems that affect their community. This is a vital component of cross-sector partnership, and it's important to all the work that we're doing. And what Jamil was able to do was engage community, and he did that through a whole bunch of different tools. He had dinners, town hall meetings, block parties, and hundreds of people would turn out for these events. And not only would they turn out, but they kept returning. And so he was developing critical mass of a community voice, which is so important. If Jamil was here, he would make sure that he pointed out that that second picture in the middle on the screen right now is the CEO of the local United Way. And he'd tell all you folks, if you want to raise money, get a dunk tank, put a funder up there, and boy, you will rake in the dollars. His ability to convene people and get them to come out to these events was amazing, and it really kind of came to an apex when he started doing his neighborhood survey work, and that was incredibly amazing. He hired people from the community, paid them a competitive salary, provide them training, and then sent them out to administer a survey. And get this, and I know there's some researchers out there, hold on to your chair. He got a 74% response rate on a community survey. Talk about a powerful trust-building tool to engage community. And boy, did we, not only was this an effective engagement strategy, but Promise Neighborhood gained instant credibility with local nonprofits, and we busted some long-standing urban myths. Things like people use the emergency room when they don't have insurance. Well, it ended up that as many people use the emergency room to access their care with insurance as people without insurance. It had nothing to do with insurance. It had everything to do with convenience. We identified residencies that the city had no idea existed. They weren't on any of their GIS mapping. So things like fire calls and police calls, they had no idea that there were residents in some of these neighborhoods. Excuse me. Everybody at this point wanted to be Jamil's friend. Everybody wanted access to his data, and everybody wanted to know the secret of how do you engage community. So doing this work has really been amazing in allowing us to get folks closest to the pain at the table. And the takeaway from this is we've got to invest in community engagement by investing in community. Funders, you're going to get a lot of heat for funding an agency that's not providing a direct service. Why are you funding these guys when they're not addressing a particular problem? Nonprofits, if you have the opportunity for this to happen in your community, please be patient. This type of investment just pays incredible dividends. We can't do this work without this level of community engagement. I'm going to stop here, and I know there are all sorts of questions rolling in. Christine, can you review the 4 C's of community practice again?
Yes, I can. The 4 C's, and these were identified by the fellows themselves. This, again, was completely initiated and driven by them. So they decided what was important to them was contributing to collective impact efforts, continuous learning, creating a new culture for doing this type of work, and connecting with the other fellowship classes.
Thank you. Next question, what levels are the fellows typically? ED, CEOs, program managers, etc. You want to take a crack at that one?
Sure, absolutely. We've had a little bit of everybody. We have definitely had executive directors and CEOs of their organizations. We've also had folks who've worked as program managers. The Ryder Pool Foundation has a unique relationship with one of our large local hospitals who have very generously nominated 3 of the folks that will work in different aspects of the hospital network. So we've had program managers, doctors, and folks who head up different types of programs. We also currently have someone who's the head of an emerging coalition. We've had people who are at the end of their career. We've had people who are at the beginning of their career. Our focus is definitely to get that critical mass of people who can be change leaders in our community.
And we're really careful about when we select fellows. We try and get some folks that are emerging as leaders, as well as some folks that are long in tooth. They've been in their position for a long time. We want a nice mixture of folks. We want the work of the fellows to continue beyond the next 5 or 10 years when folks when some of these folks may retire or folks leave the area. We want to identify emerging leaders to be a part of this. What is the difference between collective impact and other partnerships? Boy, that is a great question and a loaded question. I hear a lot of people talk about they're doing collective impact. And again, when you start asking them what makes a collective impact, well, we're working together with people. And I think one of the things that makes collective impact different than other what folks call collaboratives or partnerships is there's a certain amount of rigor that needs to be in place. It's just not we're a bunch of folks working together. there are really some conditions that have to be hit, which is some of those milestones that we were talking about. Hey, look, it's not collective impact until you got community at the table. It's not collective impact until you have clear, concise metrics of what you're trying to accomplish. You just can't get some folks together saying, well, we care about food, so this is collective impact. So I think the difference between collective impact and partnership is rigor, but I'd encourage you to go to the Collective Impact Forum site and read some of the articles that are available there that will provide a much deeper, richer explanation than I just provided. I have time for one more question. This is a great story about community engagement. Has these efforts been institutionalized? Again, how do you sustain, I'm sorry, I got to scroll and read here. How do you sustain these efforts? That's a really, really good question. Boy, how do you institutionalize this? I think you take some early examples of this, you show value in this, you get people to invest in this, and I think that's how it becomes institutionalized. You show value for it. I think Jamil is a little bit ahead of the curve on this work, quite honestly, or was, which is probably why everybody recruited him for all these other great jobs. He was able to do that, and now we've got a kind of backfill of, okay, now we got this community ready to go. How do we make sure that they're engaged in the work that needs to be done? I'd like to just kind of scrap the rest of the.
These questions are amazing. Thank you.
But we do have an agenda that we want to try and stick to. And so Christine is going to talk a little bit about backbone development. Trying.
Great. As I mentioned, there is significant excitement for collective impact and collaboration in the Lehigh Valley. And this has contributed to many organizations being deemed or oftentimes claiming for themselves the role of backbone. Such actions usually come about out of good intentions, perhaps combined with a belief that backbones are the ones that get the resources. So one of the questions Rider Pool had was, how can they help break this pattern? So one, at least in our community, we're coming to the realization that funders should be very careful about being the ones to choose backbone. Rather, funders might want to consider funding what we're calling proto-backbones or navigators. I know that was a term that Ron had mentioned before. As folks who can convene and facilitate coalitions until the coalition can determine the right backbone structure. We've also come to the realization that for us, funders need to recognize that backbones don't and probably shouldn't emerge in nascent CI initiatives. Based on the FSG and Aspen Institute's phases of CI, backbones don't officially appear until phase 2 or 3 of the collective impact initiative's development. So we want to be very careful that funders aren't putting the cart before the horse, so to speak, by funding backbones that then need to go in search of an initiative. When it does make sense to invest in a backbone, the funders in our community need to make sure that that investment counts. Backbones can't function on a wing and a prayer, and that funding backbones is different than funding grantees. Funders and backbones need to work in partnership to set out benchmarks for success, and that these criteria will be different and will require a different type of assessment than that of other grantees. Funders need to be adaptable in what they require, and expect of backbones. And going along with that, funders can't just fund backbone staff, but they need to fund backbone activities, such as training and meeting facilitation, leadership development, the community engagement strategies that the Promise Neighborhoods of the Lehigh Valley was so successful at, and data sharing. One of the pieces of feedback we've received from a majority of our fellows is the importance and need for thinking about those shared metrics and how do you share data. And there's this lofty goal of doing so, but the logistics that are involved are a lot harder than a lot of them thought, or a lot of them actually tackled before they got involved in a coalition. So when funders say they want backbones to be backbones, for lack of a better term, they got to put their money where their mouth is and start funding the activities that allow backbones to do the job that they are expected to do within coalitions. And that all of those activities are interwoven and are setting a foundation for later work, and that it's not a set of outputs rather, but it's the entire picture. So funders need to be a part of that backbone development, but they need to kind of think about that role a little bit differently and fund a little bit differently.
Our last capacity building area is building data capacity. And when we had this conversation in Seattle, this came up more often than any other capacity building issue. People were really kind of stuck with the fact that we don't have the data, we can't get people to share data. What do we do? What do we do? And we really kind of listened and really wanted to try and look at building data capacity as an important part of our overall strategy. We really believe that there's more to data sharing than just swapping reports. There's really, I find it humorous, but I'm sure many of you might not, story about one of our local providers here who tried to convene some folks to do collective impact. And he called about 40 people into a room, and he said, we want to do collective impact, and we got to find out what the issues are, and give me your data, and I'm going to go take it all back, and I'm going to come up with the topic that we should do this on. And he had, heard crickets. Nobody sent him data. And he's going, I don't understand this. We're trying to do collective impact here. We're trying to coordinate. We're trying to do this, and people won't share their data. I don't understand what's wrong here. And we kind of sat him down and said, all right, let's think this through. Do these folks know you? Do they trust you? In situations like this, we made the analogy of those, if you're ever invited to those events where you get $5 off your ticket if you bring a canned good with you. And it's not something that you're really invested in, but you want to save the $5, so you want to participate in it. So you go down to the cupboard and you get that dented can of yams with the torn label, and you say, okay, here's my canned good. So unless folks are invested in what the process is, you're just not going to get them to share their data. You just can't open up an invitation and expect everybody to say, here are my data. It's just not how it works. So if you really want to make full use of data, what we need to do here is, A, make sure that there's trust. Everybody has to know each other and has to trust each other if they're going to put their data on the table. It's just that simple. You really need clear results and clear strategies if you want this to happen. And we have found some success in making sure that there's a formal data sharing agreement on the table, signed by everybody that's involved, that says, here's what we're doing, here are the data that we want, here's what we're going to do with the data, here's who can see it, here's who owns it, and we specify all that stuff up front before anybody puts data one on the table. So, and then you need a place to put all the data. And so, shared platforms like Community Commons or the Urban Institute's community platform become really important. How do you provide greater access to information, and how do you provide the opportunity for folks to put their information in a safe, secure place? And I mentioned earlier when I was talking about rapid prototyping of providing everybody with a data platform hub. And I just wanted to tell a little story about Community Commons, the data platform that we're using. And let me start off by saying this is not a commercial. This is just something that we chose as a data platform, and it's free for the most part for the access to public data and mapping. We used this years ago when we were launching our first community health needs assessment. and we found it to be a really helpful tool. Because we were one of the first users of the original, we were asked to beta test the Community Commons revised version. And so really got to play with the data platform and saw it as a really cool, effective tool to get people to share data and to give them access to data. So I'd encourage you to go to Community Commons and look at them as an example of a shared platform. Now, we had to put some money into this to get the hubs created. It wasn't a lot of money. The Community Commons is a nonprofit, but we were able to set up hubs that folks are able to share data, and we're able to draft some data sharing agreements between some pretty heavy hitters, a hospital, a district attorney's office, and a county prison. So we kind of cut our teeth on what do you need in this data sharing agreement to really get at creating safe space for people to share data. So again, this is kind of a new emerging piece for us. We're in the second month of this idea of using hubs and hublets as areas for collective impact initiatives to share data. And I hope that there will be a lot of rich information for us to share in the future. And because we have so many questions, oh, you know what? I would like to just spend a couple of minutes talking about our early successes. Thank you. It really has been, everything that we had anticipated and then some. I had to go back in front of my board and explain how their investment is being used. And when I started compiling all this information, we're really kind of thrilled with the traction that we're getting here. So the Collective Impact Fellowship is achieving exactly what we wanted it to do. We are getting representation from numerous sectors, folks who have not worked with each other before, who now have a relationship with other leaders in other sectors. And we're starting to see projects emerge from these partnerships. So there are 7 to 10 emerging collective impact initiatives that the fellows are involved with that probably would not have occurred without the fellowship. We've had 16 folks start and complete the fellowship, so we had a 100% graduation rate in our first 2 classes. All of our graduates are paying it forward, so they didn't just take their certificate and go back to their organization. They're following those 4 C's. They're looking for ways of giving back to the community. And these are folks that, when you talk to them early on, they're saying, boy, I'm so busy, I don't know if I have time for this. And they're seeing that their investment of time is good for their organization. It helps them accomplish what they're trying to accomplish. So this isn't one more task that they have to do. This is something that is helping them achieve their mission, their vision, their goals and objectives. All 16 graduates are reporting that they are better organizational leaders than when they started the fellowship. And every year, as Christine had noted, we're able to increase the class size. Every faculty member that we have recruited has returned. They love coming back to the Lehigh Valley to do this work. They find it very energizing. They're just thrilled to be a part of this. I mentioned that there are emerging collaboratives coming from the framework. There is alignment between funders like I have never seen, specifically between the United Way and Ryder Pool Foundation. Combined, we have $1 million invested in capacity, and we're seeing returns on that investment. Our work is getting the attention of others. We have presented at 3 national conferences this year. The Chamber of Commerce is sponsoring collective impact people to come to the Lehigh Valley to talk to business owners about the role that collective impact plays on this, on our work here. And we're seeing early systemic and infrastructure changes. I mentioned earlier the fact that our prison, our hospital, and our district attorney's crime center are sharing data around mental health. So we now have prison, law enforcement, and emergency room data around where folks with mental health are. And by mapping this, we're able to start looking at how do we apply resources better, how do we train police officers better to intervene on mental health issues, how do we make sure that people that end up being incarcerated, and right now our county prison is the largest mental health provider in the county? How do we make sure that those folks are getting discharged and linked with treatment immediately so that their meds don't run out and so that they're not getting themselves jammed up, they're getting right back into treatment? And one of the most exciting things is we're leveraging our funding. For every dollar the Ryder Pool Foundation has spent on the Collective Impact Fellowship, we've received $1 of funding from somewhere else. So we're leveraging our funding to help support this work. And the questions just keep on coming. You ready to start tackling some of them?
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Rana, I'll let you take a first crack.
Are there other fellowship programs in the nation? One of the things that we did early on was we kind of did a Google search and made some phone calls and said, hey, we're doing this. Is there anybody else that's doing anything like this? And we found a couple of examples of cross-sector partnership fellowships occurring. One in the San Francisco area where they bring people from, again, all over the country. But as far as we know, we are the only place-based fellowship program like this in the United States. There's a very cool collaboration college that's being run out of the HCA Foundation in Tennessee. That's really interesting. It's not as long or intense, but it's probably the closest thing that we've seen. We'd love to have peers here. So if there are folks that are doing this work that we can benchmark against, that we can talk to and compare notes, fantastic. Please let us know. What is the cost of the leadership program for individuals and for funders? It costs us about $200,000 for each class. It's about $20,000 per fellow. And that includes Christine had mentioned that each fellow gets a stipend. Each fellow's organization gets a stipend. So that's $5,000. So it's about $15,000 for the faculty and the expenses and to maintain the community of practice, and $5,000 per stipend per fellow. So about $20,000 per year, depending on the size of the class, anywhere from $180,000 to $200,000 a year to sustain this. If all the funders, sorry, the way this room is set up, the monitor is against the wall and the microphone is about 20 feet away, and my aging eyesight's not as good, so I got to squint a little to read some of these. If all the funds focus on Allentown, do you struggle with raising funds from funders outside of Allentown? Do we struggle? Oh, thank you. Somebody just made the font a lot bigger. Thank you, Kurt, or whoever. Honestly, we haven't faced that problem yet. I think the challenge comes when we start having those collective impact initiatives that require ongoing funding. And part of this has been, how do we bring our peers, our other funders, on board with some of this stuff? Because this really is generational work, and we just can't do this work in 2 to 3 year grants. We've got to take a longer term approach towards this. Funders get easily distracted by shiny objects. So how do we keep us and our peers focused on what we're trying to accomplish here? And we're not into this long enough to be able to answer that. Jamil did a great community engagement. How did the fellowship build capacity related to community engagement through the fellowship? It provided Jamil with an opportunity of saying, okay, you need community, where do you need them? So it was nice to kind of do this on parallel tracks of, hey, we've got to value community, we've got to value them at the table here before we invite them. So one of our faculty members, Melvin Jackson, is famous for saying, don't invite me to the table for menu planning if you've already determined what's on the menu. So being able to simultaneously have a trusted member of the community, finding folks from the community and getting them at the right tables where they are welcomed and embraced becomes really critical. 5, who designed the coursework, i.e. Collective Impact 101? We we talked about the important components of collective impact fellowship, what we wanted to highlight, and then we went around the country and found the people that we thought were best at this and said, please develop the curriculum. With the collective impact piece, we went to FSG and we hired Erin White to be faculty, and she has served as faculty for the last 3 years on this. So our goal here is who's best at this around the country, and how do we get them to come to Allentown? And boy, those were some really interesting first conversations of, hey, we got this crazy idea. Would you like to come on a journey with us? And we were, I guess, pretty convincing because everybody chose to join us, and they're all sticking around. You want to take the next one?
Sure. You mentioned a goal of training 50 in 5 years. Do you expect that to be sufficient for some period of time? Totally buy the idea of building community capacity for effective CI, but it seems like this is going to be an ongoing challenge. Absolutely right. I think that Ron and I would both agree that sustainability is absolutely a challenge. And we do want to train 50 fellows in 5 years, but our hope is that the ripple effect from this training program will expand far beyond that. We do think that there is an incredible value to having 50 people in a small zone around Allentown, all doing work, who have gone through this program. But we have both Allentown is encompassed within a larger Lehigh Valley, and so many of our fellows work not just within the city, but across our region. And so we know that this work will spread out, and our hope is that the way that they do work will change, their behavior will change, and that it will create a contagion in the best possible way. But I think identifying those challenges of keeping this sustainable will be something that we'll continue to go back and reassess and adapt to the fellowship to what our community needs when it needs it.
Also would like to hear about how Allentown Renaissance was the catalyst for this work. I've been with the Ryder Pool Foundation for 17 years. Predominantly, our work has been around the neighborhoods that we described earlier. The downtown area was just rotting retail businesses and local government. Boy, the question just disappeared. Oh, it was you. Thanks. Okay, now. So we have, just years and years and years of engagement in the communities that surround this downtown area. When you see $2 billion of economic development occurring here, the one thing we didn't want to do was become Atlantic City. So we approached the for-profit leaders and said, okay, guys, we got two options here. Either we build a wall around all your investment and keep the community out, or we figure out how do we engage the community and how do we find that sweet spot where economic development and community development intersect. And that was really kind of the driving force behind selecting those neighborhoods as the place where we wanted to do this work. Quite frankly, we were already in those neighborhoods, so it made perfect sense to us, not taking advantage of $2 billion of economic development to say, how do we make sure all boats rise with this was just, it was just a no-brainer. Would you be willing to share your model with others who may want to replicate what you have developed? Can we see the curriculum or purchase the rights? You can see the curriculum. We will send you the curriculum. If you just forward me your name, we'll share everything with you. We find that the more we give this away, the stronger it becomes. So this is about contribution to the field. This is about the work that we're all trying so hard to accomplish. So if you'd like to see it, we'd be happy to share it with you. Is it challenging for the fellows to work with those who haven't been trained? Either collaborative groups may include some who haven't been trained. I think that's part of the training, is how to work with everybody, how to include everybody. So I'm sure that there are challenges. I'm sure that and I know this for a fact, there's challenges with fellows working with each other. This is just not work for the faint of heart. This is not easy stuff. There are going to be challenges around every single corner. Sometimes it's easier doing it without with someone who hasn't been trained, because you don't get the wait a second, I know what you're trying to do. If there are problems there, they haven't surfaced yet.
Time for one or two more questions?
Yes. I think we got to do, what if the funder is the backbone? Well, I guess that's an easy one because, what do you do?
Yeah, no, I think that's a great question, and one that we've talked about internally, as well as with the United Way of the Greater Lehigh Valley, who's been working on building the community capacity, the community ecosystem for collaboration. And I don't know if there's an easy answer. I think that we've seen examples of funders being successful backbones. We had Kim Fortunato come to visit our community. I think Campbell's was a great example of a funder as a successful backbone. I think it depends on the community. I think it depends on the conversation. I think it depends on transparency. If the funder is transparent about their intentions and is going about the collective impact initiative with good faith and good intentions and doing that openly, I think it works. Again, we've been able to discuss from the perspective of what's worked in our community. We, as Ron said, we don't want to say that we have all the answers or that we're doing it right or that we haven't made mistakes and we're not still learning. So I think it's a community by community choice and need.
And if there's a collective impact initiative and that group says, funder, we would like you to be the backbone, then it's perfectly appropriate to be the backbone. I think the theory that we're trying to kind of test out here in our work is, boy, you can't have the backbone before you have the collective impact initiative, because it's really the members that are doing the work that are identifying the backbone, not the funder, not the person or the agency that the funder gave the contract to. I mean, it'll be really easy to say, Promise Neighborhood, you're a backbone. Now go out and do backbone stuff. But they're not a backbone because there has to be something in place to be the backbone of. So if an initiative grows and they say, Promise Neighborhood, we'd like for you to be our backbone, or United Way, we'd like for you to be our backbone, then, on our theory, and again, we haven't tested any of this stuff out yet, but it's our belief that you shouldn't be identifying the backbone until you have the initiative up and ready to go. And we haven't seen anything close to being up and ready to go yet. Sure.
So we've got a question here. Agree with the points about the backbone, but how are you building capacity related to the backbone? Is it a training course or something else? A great question. And I think Ron could speak to this, but I know that this is definitely something that's ongoing of how best to do that. I will say that when Paul Schmitz was able to come into town, we had him meeting with several different community groups, and one was a kind of backbone-only session, or representatives from organizations that have, again, either assumed or been deemed the backbone, or seem to be emerging as an individual who could lead a backbone. And Paul went through the roles and tasks of backbones and kind of reminded everyone in the room that being a backbone isn't sexy. It's hard work. It's often thankless work. And then I think what was really exciting was the individuals in the room started talking about forming their own learning community to discuss strategies and challenges, and they were encouraged to take the initiative and do that. That's definitely not the only capacity building, but I think making sure that they don't feel like they're alone and giving them the support to meet and learn from each other is one way of doing that, but definitely ongoing learning.
Boy, I really wish that this was more interactive, that we could actually have dialogue around this, because we got a great comment from somebody who is pushing back, and thank you. I don't know who you are, but thank you for pushing back. Their comment was choosing a backbone. This slide isn't sitting well with me. I'm sure community engagement facilitation requires a set of skills, and that a funder can choose a good one. Thank you. We by no means want to be saying, oh, this is the way that it has to be done. I am sure that there are funders out there who have made some brilliant decisions around selecting backbones and have done it in a way that is really effective. We're going to try and see if we can do it where it's occurring more organically, and maybe we can find some time where we can compare notes. And see if we can add to this conversation about what is the best way for this to happen. So as I said in the disclaimer, I don't want to come across as, oh, we have the answers, we get this stuff. This is just our theory.
So there's about 3 minutes left. I'm not sure if
Sherry wants to do a wrap up.
We should turn it over, but I want to thank you everyone for your questions. I wish we had had the time to get to all of them, but we appreciate the engagement.
Thank you, Christine and Ron. This is Sherry again. I wanted to just say thank you both to this great presentation. It was great, and people are still excited. Sorry I have to be the buzzkill to close this out. To the participants, thank you very much for joining us today for the second in our Collective Impact webinar series for 2016, the what, the why, and the how of building capacity for collective impact. We hope you enjoyed the presentation. And then we're going to do another one. We have the third of the series, How to Integrate Continuous Learning into Collective Impact, on November 29th, 2016. Please join us for that one. As I mentioned earlier in the call, you can find today's PowerPoint slides on collectiveimpactforum.org. You'll also be receiving an email that will link you directly to the file shortly. We remind you again to join the Collective Impact Forum for access to even more information, materials, and networks around collective impact. We ask also that you take a moment and complete the evaluation that will appear on your screen. And your comments and suggestions are important to us as they help us adjust our programming to fit the needs of our audience and try to be more helpful to you, to the field. Thank you again for joining us today, and we look forward to continuing the conversation.